Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Jake Mellen with me today. Jake, in his day to day, works in philanthropy, but today we'll speak about having psoriasis. Um, for some intro, Jake was diagnosed with psoriasis at age 7. And then, right before we get started, I just want to say this is episode 4 of the series I'm calling How I Improved My Mental Health. And just to anybody out there who has faced mental health challenges in the past and has gotten better with managing them, if you have a story that you'd like to share, please feel free to reach out to me, hoping to continue to normalize mental health conversations and help and possibly inspire others to realize things can get better through these conversations. So, Jake, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here and talk about mental health and, like you said, try to normalize it a bit and break down barriers.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that for us. So, set the scene. For the people that don't know you, in terms of maybe when the first signs of psoriasis appeared, how they were discovered, just your story.
Yeah, so psoriasis is a skin disease that typically appears after traumatic. Well, it's a genetic disorder, but it will appear in like places that have traumatic effect to the skin area. So for me, I was born with clubfoot, which is a disease when you're born. My feet were out like that, sort of just pointed outwards, and my right foot was pretty okay, but my left foot needed surgery again when I was in the first grade. And so after surgery on that foot, maybe a few months or a year after, psoriasis started to appear because it was, on the traumatic area. And so these sort of like a white plaque appeared on my foot and as well as on my knees and my elbows. And they were just very, very noticeable, right? Like couldn't really cover it up unless it was covered by clothing. And it was obviously very noticeable. And, when you're growing up, especially, late elementary school, middle school, kids start to really notice, things that are different about you. So, start pointing out, oh, what's that? What's that? And I'd be very self-conscious about it because I'm like, well, my skin isn't quite normal. And, how do I fit into all this? And, it was difficult because there really, for me growing up, was not that much treatment for psoriasis. It was a pretty not well-known disease. So, dermatologists didn't really know how to treat it. There were a couple of experimental things. There were a couple of ointments, but nothing really did the trick for me. And on top of that, it was just incredibly expensive to get those sort of treatments. And so, try to do whatever I could to kind of cover it up, right? So do longer, baggier clothes, or I did a lot of Band-Aids on the psoriasis, just in, sort of any effort to cover it up. And so that was sort of, the growing up story. It was, very othering, which is very difficult to deal with, especially in middle school, high school. And then for me, I mean, it was only, within the past year where it actually started to clear up. I had gotten on Mass Health, which is our public health option in Massachusetts, and it, got a dermatologist appointment for the first time in 5-6 years, maybe plus. Yeah. And then, she was like, all right, here's the exact medication you need. Got it. Within like 3 months, it was clear. It was $5 versus $600 on my last insurance. So, it's life-changing too, because, while it's not a disease that really affects, my own health, my physical health, like my confidence, right? It's, life is about physical health, mental health, and confidence. And, when one of those is kind of shot, some of the other things go as well. And so
appearance.
Right. Yeah. Right. So for me, that really helped my confidence to not have psoriasis and not constantly be thinking about, how can I kind of hide it from the public, or, how do I sort of treat this? It just went away. And that's, one less sort of stressor in my life that allows me to sort of focus on the other aspects of my life.
Yeah, no, thank you for the story. you talked about, obviously there's the physical part of the disease, but more the mental health part and the psychological impact of, you know, having to hide it.
Mm.
If you can elaborate a little bit, just for people that never had to deal with it, maybe are there any stories like maybe summer days at a pool or something, like you're just
Oh
wearing
yeah.
longer clothing, or I mean, just for perspective on the measures you would take.
Oh yeah. So my most common MO would be sort of putting, like those massive band-aids that you get for like massive open wounds, put those on my knees. I did that a lot. And people would always be like, oh wow, what'd you do to yourself? And I'm like, oh, I fell, just sort of brush it off. Uh, and obviously band-aids weren't meant to cover up psoriasis, but any sort of way that I could try to hide it, I did it. As well as typically shorts sort of cut down at your right above your knees. I'd wear my shorts down to below my knees because that's where the worst affected area was. And so just again, sort of any effort to cover it up, or on top of my foot. If I was standing barefoot, like especially outside a pool, I would put my right foot on top of my left foot, like very sort of casual. It's an unnatural stance, but you wouldn't think twice about someone doing it. And that's sort of how I went about most of life through middle and high school, was how can I sort of appear normal without without appearing like I'm doing something kind of fishy. So I found kind of, I don't want to say cunning ways, but different ways to try to hide it. And it's just kind of stinks.
Yeah, yeah,
Like having to think about those extra measures, kind of every day. And if a band-aid fell off in public, I was like, well, shit, I'm out of luck.
yeah. I'm curious, hearing that, and what I mentioned, when you were saying your story was appearance. How did you approach relationships, and was it tough to get into relationships
Oh
knowing
yeah.
that they might see that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredibly hard to be vulnerable in that state, right? I remember going on dates, and, after it's like, oh shit, like, how do I hide this? Change the lighting, or, whatever I can do to try to hide it. Um, I avoided dating like a plague in high school, especially because I was at pretty much at its worst, was high school for me for psoriasis. So, it became an afterthought for a lot of my life. um and getting rid of it is like, wow, I don't have to think about these things anymore. It's just a part of my history. And it's really kind of like a weight off my shoulder to not have to think about that and can focus on these other things.
Yeah. As you look back on your journey, would do you have any advice to a younger kid dealing with psoriasis? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Nobody really understands what it's like to live with, not just psoriasis, but any sort of outward looking skin disease, right? Like it's all kind of looped into the same category. And I mean, it's just try to power through it, right? There's not, you take care of your skin the best you can, right? Whatever ointments you can get, whatever over the counter stuff is available. There's the physical aspect of trying to take care of the disease, but then mentally it's just be yourself, right? Like, I still manage to have friends, have relationships, do whatever even with it. And I mean, it's a massive sort of hurdle to jump through, but as long as you can only work on the skin disease aspect so much. It's about working on your sort of emotional health and mental health as well, to try to get over the hump, get over the hurdle.
Yeah. How would you advise, a friend who, has a friend of theirs that has psoriasis, in terms of supporting that friend?
Yeah, I mean, for me it was, I just didn't really want to talk about it, right? Like, uh because I already felt so othered by it. So if someone mentioned what is that, which is fine to ask, like, oh, are you okay? And, for me, I would typically kind of brush it off. But once I got to know someone, once I was friends with someone, I would let them know, like, oh, I have psoriasis. Like, it sucks. It's how it is. Um, but, just be there as a support, right? Don't constantly try to figure out how to fix it, because obviously you can't fix it. You're not a medical professional. You're not the, treatment that that person needs with psoriasis. But, just being, again, sort of emotional support, and just being, a friend, right? That's what people need, especially when they're dealing with some sort of skin disease.
Is there any measure that you think, we as a society can take in terms of educating more? As I did my research for this, there were a lot of stories of, you know, people thinking it's contagious, or, even adults thinking it's contagious and not wanting their kids to be around someone with it. Um, for you, does anything come to mind in terms of, what you think would be a better way for society to be more knowledgeable about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I don't know what the percentage of public is affected by psoriasis, but it is pretty low.
Yeah.
So, you
I
know,
think it's 2 to 3%,
right, which is actually kind of
roughly,
high.
yeah, which roughly equates to 7.5 million people in the
Right.
US. Yeah.
Well, it's more than I expected. So I went through most of my life. I had only just met another person who was affected by psoriasis. Like, I found out one of my coworkers was, and it was the first time I had ever met someone else affected by it. So, I think in terms of education, it's just, general sort of healthcare know-how, especially for parents, you know, teaching them that a lot of these types of things aren't contagious, right? It's the same things with the AIDS epidemic, right? It was all this misinformation happening with, people just seeing something that they perceive that can't be affected by them, and assuming that's, really, really awful, right? Oh, I don't want to get that disease. Oh, that's a death sentence. And, it's about having sort of these candid conversations. And I think I could do a better job about that, opening up about my psoriasis, because, I mean, especially now that, it's not really outwardly on me, you know, I can be a spokesperson and say, listen, no, like, this is not contagious. This is not something to be afraid of. Yeah, so I just think, general just conversations about it. And, especially as an adult, we have an ability to not sort of like point and stare and be like, do all those things that, kids can't really control. And so it's about setting an example as an adult, right? If you see someone with some sort of physical deformity, not making any sort of deal out of it, right? It's just another sort of person going about life. And, we all have our challenges, whether they're sort of physical or on the inside, or, whatever it might be.
Yeah. E- were there any resources that you took advantage of, like online communities or anything like that, that you would recommend?
No,
Mm.
I would recommend doing that stuff. Um, you know, I was bad at it. I just sort of was like, would like to pretend almost that I didn't have it.
Mm.
As evident by me just trying to cover it up. But, it's not an effective way to deal with anything. Sometimes you're just kind of dealt the hand that's given to you, and you got to sort of figure out how to play your cards right. And I definitely think, finding online resources, and, thankfully now it's become much more evident in society, right? Like, you see like commercials all the time now. It's like Humira for psoriasis, and all these other drugs for psoriasis did not exist when I was a kid.
Mm.
It's like in this boom of like the past 5 years. And I think with that comes all these different communities, especially online, that can be incredibly helpful to someone dealing with it. Because it's not an easy thing to sort of deal with. It's just very othering, and that's a difficult state to be in.
Yeah. And then I guess one other aspect that you talked about in terms of, treatments, and their accessibility. Uh, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, so for me, I grew up and, I had insurance, but, the insurance company said that they would not cover my psoriasis medication for, whatever reason. So my options were don't do anything, or pay $600 for medication that I could not afford. Like my family just could not afford that.
Mhm.
Or, what we ended up doing was that there was a version made for the scalp. So it was, instead of like a cream, it was like a little kind of liquid bottle. And instead of putting it on my scalp, because my scalp wasn't really affected by psoriasis, I would use it on, my joints and wherever it appeared. And that's not effective. It's not what
Mhm.
it's meant for.
Yeah.
And so I would do that, and it would sort of maintain it, but not fix it, not really clear it up. And I think it just highlights sort of the failures of our healthcare system here in the US. Healthcare is about protecting people's physical and mental health. And, it failed me in both aspects, right? Because if I had gotten a treatment, I think when I was younger and when it had first appeared, I wouldn't have had these confidence issues my entire life, right? Like I would be so much, I wouldn't have had to jump through these hurdles in order to get to where I am today. It would just sort of be given to me in order to treat a disease that also can have, a lot of physical aspects to it, a lot of bad side effects. I developed arthritis from it, which,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
great. And that's something that can plague me further down the line. And you want to talk about, sort of the other aspects of it, it costs, more money down the line too for our healthcare system. So, I think it's really important to try to cure things at the root as early as possible. Try to take advantage of, my psoriasis wasn't that bad when it first appeared. And I'm sure if I had gotten the treatment I needed when it first appeared, my healthcare had covered it, it would have spiraled out of control. So that's, just something that I find, kind of frustrating to live with. It's like the failures of government are really evident sometimes. And, this is one. And I, again, also struggle with, I'm thankful that it wasn't life threatening in any way. But, I always think about, how would my life be different if I hadn't dealt with psoriasis and, really badly in middle and high school and even through college.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. One of the, final questions I wanted to ask, and this is a little deep, but, from the research I did, it said 2 to 3% of the population deals with it. And then of those, 10% deal with suicidal ideations. I'm just curious if you don't need to answer the question, but did you ever deal with that kind of stuff? And if so, do you have any advice for anybody out there dealing with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I never dealt with, anything that intense, but I mean, there would be a lot of days where I just would not want to go into public because I mean, I felt, to compare me to, some sort of like character, I felt like, Quasimodo or something like that,
Yeah.
where I just felt like this physical deformed human. And it just took a long time to sort of get over that hurdle. It was a lot of, people just showing interest in who I was as a person. And, a lot of that came in the winter when people couldn't see my skin,
Mm.
which is tough. But I mean, it's just about finding your community. I mean, for me, that's sort of what did it. Like I started doing theater my sophomore year of high school, and I think that's sort of what brought me a lot of out of my shell, because I kind of found my people, right? Like everyone was sort of dealing with their own stuff that you could either see or you couldn't see. And, from that, we kind of built community and we're able to talk about our issues and, bounce off each other for support. And that's, for me, that was the most important thing that really helped me, figure myself out and try to, jump through the hurdles that I was dealing with on a personal level.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jake, was there something that you know, you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask in this?
Yeah, I mean, I can rehash the whole healthcare thing, but it's is it worth my breath? I don't know. um, I just think it's important for all of us to kind of stay vigilant on that, right? Healthcare is really important for physical health and mental health, because another aspect to it is like maybe I probably would have seen a therapist in high school if it wasn't a barrier of cost. Um, and, again, might be a different person today or a different person earlier than what happened. It's just a lot of self-discovery. So that's all I got, man.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's why we have to be active in government and, elect good leaders. And, that's why all of that is very important.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Jake, I just want to thank you so much for coming on here and talking about that and being open to your experience. As we said, over close to 7.5 million people deal with it, and obviously some of those people are young kids, and they might be able to find inspiration through you in terms of knowing it can get better. And so I want to thank you for that. If anybody wants to reach out, um maybe to talk to you, or something like that, is there an email or something that they can do for that?
Yeah. If I just say my email, is that
Yeah,
good?
yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'll put it in the
Uh,
show notes too.
yeah, it's jmellen, Mellen 36 at gmail.com. Again, jmellen, Mellen at gmail.com. And, I just want to thank you for all you do as well. It's important stuff to try to, break down barriers, and, it's not easy. I think we're all dealing with stuff on surface level, inside, outside, whatever it might be. And these conversations help with that. Then, it makes it important.
Yeah, and for everybody out there, shout out to having real conversations at parties. Jake and I met at a party, and we just started talking about mental health, and that's how he opened up about dealing with this. And so I encourage anybody out there, even if it's a social environment, talk about the whole self and how people are actually doing, and you never know what they might tell you, and what the impact might be just from having honest conversations.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake.
Thank you.